Hello and welcome to your Action Research Roundtable, which this time will focus on writing and dissemination. I'm absolutely delighted to be joined today by Alistair Smith and Jo Fletcher-Saxon of FE Research podcast fame. And before we get into the questions today that we've got for Jo and Alistair, I'm going to stop sharing and ask them to introduce themselves. So, Alistair, do you want to say a little bit about yourself?
Yeah. Okay. Hi, I'm Alistair, and I teach photography in an art and design school, and actively do some action research. And the podcast happened by mistake because Jo invited me along to an FE research meet, and we needed to gather that and make it something bigger. Jo?
Oh, yep. Isn't this great when we're recording? Phones ring, dogs bark, it's marvellous. So yeah, my name is Jo and I'm an assistant principal at a college in East Manchester, and part of my remit is about cross-college practitioner research that we're trying to build up capacity for. But yeah, as Alistair said, so the podcast was an outcome of the FE Research Meet movement, which I've been part of for the last few years, which is all about sharing and dissemination of people's research and inquiry.
That's brilliant. So what two better people could we have to help us on our OTLA projects, thinking about sharing and dissemination, sharing our research, than the wonderful Jo and Alistair. So I'm going to share my screen again and introduce the first question. Which is, why should we talk about research in FE and share our research findings?
Okay. Who's first?
Go on, Jo, you jump in to start.
I'm going to say, well, why shouldn't we? That would be my first answer. I think we're all pretty much used to hearing about the research outputs of the schools sector and also the university sector, but we're still in a place, even though there's a community of quite active FE researchers, we're still in a place where it isn't the everyday norm for people across all parts of the FE sector. So I mean, prison education, adult and community, sixth form colleges, GFE, all the independent, all the places. We don't sort of routinely and regularly hear from the research community, and it happens. And why should we? We should, because it's our voices. We're the people on the ground at the chalk face. It's not really chalk anymore. That's in my classroom. The people who should be speaking for ourselves as part of it. It's not the only part. It's not the only people who should be speaking, but we should be part of that voice. And we might all remember, or some of us might remember, we were a little bit stung when Ofsted referred to a paucity of research within FE, and to some degree that perhaps is true, but really wasn't acknowledging what was there, and it's there, but perhaps not quite visible. And it will only get heard and seen if we all keep talking about it.
Yeah, it's that opportunity just to try and take back a little bit of the control and feed something back in. I think in one of the recent podcasts we were talking to someone from your place, Jo, weren't we, about the micro improvements and that idea of over the period of time, all the little bits add up to make a bigger change. And that only really happens if people are sharing it and disseminating it and making those tiny little changes along the way.
Yeah, I think there's also that thing as well of it's got more value if you do share it. It sort of adds to the criticality as well. If you inquire, investigate something about the pedagogy or the practice in your classroom and make some great discoveries or findings or micro improvements, well, share it, because somebody else might build on that and take that forward, and it becomes like a brick wall forever being built. It's got little value or point. It'll have some value to you, won't it? But if you just keep it to yourself, we're all about sharing.
And from the other side of that, as a consumer of research, it's great to sit in on some of the research meets, and a big part of why we do the podcast, really, it's quite selfish. It means that we get to listen to what everyone's been up to. And there are some absolute takeaway gems that we can kind of go away, think more about, maybe implement in our own work, or even pass those on and share them with people that you know are doing something similar or would really benefit from that bit of information.
Thanks, Alistair and Joe. Yeah, I completely agree. And that idea of micro changes or small steps that when you put together creates a really big picture for you to draw your ideas from, to build on. It's really important. And that idea of contextualized understanding as well. So we talk about that quite a lot in our OTLA program, about how working in FE, we work in a unique context. Every class or workshop or moment with learners, whether that you're in the secure estate, community learning, a big college, that's all building up this picture of what's happening in our sector. And what can sometimes I think people can feel a little bit worried about sharing, because they think, well, is it groundbreaking? Isn't it? Is it something new? Will anyone else care what happened in my classroom on a wet Wednesday with my art class? And I think what's really great about sharing is it's that building up of that big picture, and what you find out on a wet Wednesday could then help someone else make sense of what they're finding out on a Tuesday morning, and grow and build from there.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, some people have, it's almost like those barriers in their minds about, well, who, why, why should I say it? Who should be interested? But I mean, I would say, don't ask yourself that. If one person hears and then they pass it on to somebody else, you just don't know. You don't know the ripple effect of talking about, the things that you've found out about.
Brilliant. Right then, so I will share my screen again to see what question 2 has in store for us. So, question 2, who can we share our research with, and how might we make connections with other action researchers? So who can we share with, and how can we make connections?
I'm going to jump straight in with the obvious one, and it's us on the podcast. I think both Joe and myself have got links on our Twitter pages to the link tree, which Joe set up a fantastic form so people can kind of come and ask us. But actually, that's the kind of bigger, wider audience, which is great. But just with one another, conversations in staff rooms have as much value as any other platform. It doesn't always need to be the most formal activity. Sitting down with a coffee and talking about what you've been doing is just as important. And like Joe just said before, if you're passing that information on to just one person, that could be over a coffee rather than a more formal platform. But there are loads of places to share research.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, do start inside. In fact, it's interesting. Part of the research movement is started to push that as well, that some people are hesitant about sharing internally, but they'll go external because they may be a little bit embarrassed or something. But yeah, I mean, there are places and spaces inside your own organisations, and hopefully through which you can share what you're finding. But beyond that, oh my goodness, there are so many. So there are lots of blogs where you could take your findings or your reflections. It's not always about findings, it might be reflections. And some of them are subject specific. Some are generically, different colleges run them because they've got action research communities. And then you might go to more formal spaces, conferences and events, and again they range in sort of levels of formality and informality, really. There are big organizations like CARN and ATI, and there's lots of acronyms. You can perhaps share them through you, Vicky. And then of course, journals. There are quite a few FE research specific journals, and then again there are journals that are for subject areas. And then of course social media as well. I mean, gosh, it's endless really. Once you start looking, you just find more and more at places where you potentially could. So it's about what speaks to you, and go and speak in those places. But I'd say there's lots of, it's from very informal over the coffee right through to quite formal at a big international conference and everything in between.
I think as well, the really nice aspect is there's a lovely community feel to research in the FE sector, and lots of support. So being brave enough to ask the question of, have you got any recommendations, or I've been having a go at this, what do you suggest, is brilliant. And of course, Twitter is a great space for doing that. So many useful bits of wisdom shared on Twitter to help and support.
Yeah, great, thank you. Oh gosh, yeah, the sharing with someone over a cup of coffee in your place of work. And I certainly found when I was working on my OTLA project in my organisation, connecting with people that I didn't normally get a chance to speak with, and sometimes that sparked. So as you said, Alistair, about sharing, sort of saying, do you think this is a good idea, or where should I go next? Sparked ideas that I would never have come up with myself, and certainly maybe even within our small department with other teachers teaching the same subjects, because that diversity of approach and pedagogy and knowledge can make some really exciting connections. So I definitely advocate the sharing within as well as the sharing beyond. But thank you, you've given a really good overview of some of the people that we might share our research with, which leads on to the next question, which actually we've answered in part, which is great. So we'll see if we can build on it. So I'll share my screen and pop up for the next question, which is, where can we share and discuss our research? Does it always need to be a conference paper or a journal article?
So I mean, I already mentioned then a few places, but definitely does not always need to be that formal journal paper. That might be something, if you're on a research degree or following a doctorate or a master's, that you may work towards and you may be encouraged to as part of that process. But no, not for sure. I mean, that's where the FE research movement kind of is an advocate for, really. It's practitioners from their own classrooms, you know, investigating something, then having a platform through which to share it. I think we kind of have a mindset that we have to somehow replicate academia, and of course we don't have to. We can disseminate and share in our own ways. We mustn't forget we've got our own sector-based, well, they're called journals, but I wouldn't say they're kind of like academic journals. Well, they might not agree. So the Chartered College for Teaching, and then we've got the Intuition magazine that's Set run. I mean, those probably may well be almost in the middle of kind of levels of formality. What was the second part of the question? Remind me. There was a second part, and I thought that's the bit we should probably...
Yeah, the second part was, do we always need to share, I suppose, in written form or the traditional forms? So going to a conference or writing an article.
I'm going to like dive in here and say, historically, you know, before everyone could read and write, we shared the information by stories and talking to each other, right? So why do we feel the need to write everything down in what appears to be this kind of scary academic journal that is probably going to sit in a library on a shelf and very rarely be interacted with? I know I'm guilty. I've got masses of journal articles that I've saved up for my own research. I've got a shelf full of various bits and pieces at work as well. How often do I interact with them? A lot less than I'm interacting with real human beings and talking about research. So I think that's really kind of important, have those conversations for sure. And the extension of that, of course, is through things like podcasts and blogs and YouTube and all of those more informal feeling spaces.
It's ironic, isn't it, that in academia, the forms of dissemination that are considered to be impact are not necessarily in FE, which those that are the most impactful, if you in terms of reach, you know. And if you want to speak to a group of ESOL tutors, for example, I'd be heading to OTLA. I wouldn't, and speaking to the community there, maybe on one of their Twitter chats, for example. So yeah, I think it's a kind of horses for courses thing. Who do you want to speak to, and where would you go for your information? And you may not naturally always want to pick up an academic journal.
Yeah, thanks, Joe and Alistair. I think sometimes as well people do worry a bit that, oh, if I don't write, does it, is it not as good? And I really like that you've highlighted some of the different ways that are just as effective, if not more, I think, within the sector, certainly in terms of reach, as you say, reaching people. I've seen the most wonderful pieces of art that share someone's research journey, as you've mentioned, talking in podcasts or using video. So there's a real diversity of ways that we can share, and it certainly doesn't always have to be a conference or an article, although there are also great ways to share if that feels right for you and the research that you're doing.
I think if you can seek to share in a place where you can get some engagement, that's great for you. I know Dr. Alison Iredale at Leeds Beckett talks about that adds warrant. It gives you warrant. It's when you engage and there's a bit of criticality there. So that's a good thing to do if you can.
Yeah, that's nice, that idea of something that's open-ended so that conversations can grow and develop from your work. Yeah, nice. Okay, right, I'll share our next question then. So, how can we share our findings in ways that will reach other educators and help make a difference for learners?
We're sort of pre-answering each question almost, aren't we, as it comes? Yeah, I think if you've got a story to tell, and you may not have formal findings, but you've got some, information you've gathered, I think you have to ask yourself where would you go and to share that, if you do, because naturally your subject community is probably going to be heading to the same spaces, or the really familiar spaces, if you want to get that out there or get people engaging with you. I mean, I know we talk about Twitter as well, but not everybody's on Twitter, so do be mindful of that. I think, I think it's a bubble. It's definitely a bubble, a particular social media bubble. It's great to get involved with if you're part of the FE research community, but it's not for everybody. So there might be other, people. Some people use LinkedIn and use the sort of blog space that's on there. Some people just get stuff added to newsletters from different organisations. There's just a massive ways, but think about yourself and your staff room. Where are they looking?
Yeah, I think it's also worth talking about the research college group as well at this point, because what we've tried to do with that is create a space that's accessible and supportive at the same time, because not everyone has the same level of research experience. So the idea that we can mentor people through it and help them find some of these best pathways to share their work and maybe go through ethics considerations and talk about getting the support of others and forming little communities through the create groups as well that they're called.
Yeah, so we should probably say that's just launched in May of this year. So it's 10 founder colleges have started that, but it will be open to other people to join the community. I'm trying to avoid the word membership, but join the community. And there's lots of ways people can engage with the research college group. So as Alistair said, we've got this create group. So if people want to form and work with peers on an inquiry or a piece of action research, they can. Or maybe they want to just come to the group because they want an ethics process, because that's something often that doesn't exist in colleges, or they want advice, or there's with the beginnings of a journal space there as well. So that's something that hopefully will grow, and people can join as individual members. They don't have to be coming from a college that's really active in that space.
Oh, that's great, and we'll be excited to see that space develop as well, and to learn more following the launch. So it's really nice to know there's that opportunity, and that you don't have to, that you can come as an individual. So if it's something that you're really passionate or interested in, it's something you can find others to connect with. So I wondered, something that really struck me when I went to FE Research Meet at Ashton College, Joe, was there was a space that the only way I can describe it was like research speed dating, where you were able to share in sort of 5-minute slots. So do you want to say a little bit more about those types of sharing?
Okay, so not everybody felt able to stand up, talk to an auditorium of people and then go off and lead a workshop. So we arranged, like you said, it probably looked like speed dating. We just called it mini meets. And we do kind of play around with that day. We've done mini meets online as well during lockdown. So people would just sit one-to-one and share for 5 or 10 minutes the kind of inquiry or investigation that they were leading, the thing that we were looking at. So just a bit of dialogue, a bit of conversation. It was sort of replicating that coffee over a coffee type of feel, isn't it? Because yeah, for sure, not everybody wants to stand up and, you know, do the whole, well, hey, look at me, this is what I've been doing. So yeah, I know there's lots of us that try and create those more informal, small, intimate opportunities.
That was really nice as well. Certainly in my experience of that was that ability to, in a really informal space, lean back and say, oh, if you're interested in that, you should go and talk to someone over there. I was in their talk earlier this morning and it was absolutely fantastic. So it's not just the opportunity to talk about your research, but also be a part of the bigger picture and feed in and share that information kind of that little bit wider. Like I think Joe said earlier, the ripple effect, isn't it?
Yeah, because these events, whether they're in real life or online, or the offshoots that happen in social media spaces, it's not a linear path, is it? Or it's not just A to B, I'm telling you and you're telling me something. There's just offshoots, and then people connect with other people and it just grows and grows. And that's really healthy and important, I think.
Yeah, that's great. And I know some people through our OTLA program, I think it was on last year's program actually, a couple of the project leads there, they created what they were calling coffee break reads. So something that you could share if you're lucky enough to have a staff room or in your shared working space, wherever you are with colleagues, but something that's like really accessible and, you know, something as well, top tips or things that people can try that hopefully will make a real difference to their practice with learners as well.
Yeah, I know there's it might be Heathfield School or something like that. It's a research school, because of course schools have got a kind of more formalized network for research. They have on their website 100-word summaries, and that's quite nice. You know, that people have been looking at something, and so all the staff produce, and it's maximum 100 words. So that's certainly very accessible. Yeah.
Yeah, that's lovely. Okay, shall I move on to our fifth question? Okay, so and this one's especially for you both, because I know how busy you are. So as very busy teachers, which forms of dissemination have inspired you and retained your interest, and why?
Oh, well, I guess that's why we do what we do then, because it's always about the conversation for me. So it's dialogue-based opportunities. But it is the kind of meets and conferences and networks and those spaces really that I find most engaging. You know, reading for me it takes me a long time, a lot of processing time, so I have to put aside, you know, time to do that. But of course, conversation is very accessible. What about you, Alistair?
I think I'd agree completely about the conversational aspect of it. And it's the conversations that make me find time when I'm busy. Because yes, we're busy, and I do loads of stuff, as does Joe, but we've always managed to find time for the stuff that interests us or kind of keeps us going. And certainly for me, one of the motivators in coming about with the whole podcast thing was I felt I missed out on some really important conversations at the FE research meet at Ashton Sixth Form College. And I didn't want to miss out on those conversations. So it was like, right, well, how can we get these and package them up so that selfishly, so I can listen to them again, but more importantly, there might be other people that feel they missed out on that. And we were in an online space only the other day where people were trying to decide between 4 breakout rooms and they couldn't. And part of what we're doing is to capture that so that everyone can access them. So yeah, busy, okay. Once you've got something like a conversation, it's worth kind of making the time and it becomes enjoyable. So definitely back to what Joe said with those. Yeah.
One of the things I've done to combine the two is I've joined an academic reading group, so that also, well, we're not reading research or academic papers in isolation. You know, you've got friends and peers to help you digest and consider what's being discussed.
That's a really nice idea, Joe, that idea of sort of coming together to share in some reading. And again, I know in a couple of previous OTLA projects that reading circles have been created for that reason. And then what's been fascinating is that practice has then been replicated in things like GCSE English classes, where learners have come together to access either, I know one project, they're doing that via audio, so they're listening to a book and discussing that, and another project they've been physically reading and sharing in a text. So it's a really nice idea to think about how we connect with research and other people's research, as well as sharing.
Is it Angie Lenton you're thinking of there?
It might be.
Because we just had her on the podcast. Yeah, we did. So, we've had a number of OTLA participants come on the podcast, and I know we had somebody called Angie. So hello, Angie, in case she sees this. So she was talking about her cross-college English project, so it sounded familiar.
Oh, that's wonderful. And this is really lovely, because today is all about, we're talking about writing and dissemination and sharing, and that, you know, that FE research podcast has been a really lovely and supportive vehicle to help our project team share. And I know I've been really excited listening to your podcasts whilst I've been out and about. So I'm just going to share my screen one more time before I come back to Joe and Alistair, because they have a question to ask you all as well, for us to think about as we prepare for our big celebration event on the 9th of July, and then also into our roundtable following that later on in July. So I'll share my screen for the last time. And just so we've looked at 5 key questions today. Why should we talk about research in FE and share our research findings? Who can we share our research with? And how can we make connections with other action researchers? Where can we share and discuss our research? Does it always need to be in a conference paper or journal article? How can we share our findings in ways that will reach other educators and help make a difference for learners? And as very busy teachers, which forms of dissemination have inspired you and retained your interest, and why? So you've heard from us, you've heard from Joe, you've heard from Alistair, but we really want to hear from you. So what questions have you got about writing, dissemination, sharing that you'd like us to discuss together during our research roundtable? We've got opportunity to ask the questions and to find support that will really help us moving forwards. So we have a course Padlet board, which the address is there, and you can submit your questions via that. So let me stop sharing for the last time. And before we finish off for today, Joe and Alistair, do you want to tell us a little bit about what you might do at the sharing event, and also the question that you have for
okay, yeah, well, I think I'm there in the morning and Alistair in the afternoon, and it'd be great to if we're able to record some bits on the day, we will, and then we can try and weave that into a podcast. But we'd definitely like to get volunteers to come on, and it might be in groups, it might be people might want to do a takeover of the podcast space. That's absolutely welcome as well. And we want to try and capture a bit of what's going on. So, or it might just be Alistair and I in conversation. Well, I heard this. So all of that is to play for, I think. Yeah. Alistair, what were we going to ask?
Really, it was just to think about, where would you like to go to find out information and research findings for yourself? Because that is probably what's going to drive where you disseminate your work. So it was to go away and think about what spaces you would like to visit to kind of consume the research from. Is the most important. You know, one of the rules we do with our podcasts is we try to make them, it sounds a strange rule, but we say, you know, if you're listening to it in the bath, you're going to fall asleep and drown or remain engaged. So we try and keep them sort of short and snappy and a little bit entertaining, rather than kind of going on and on and on for too long. So think about that. You know, how would you want this? Do you want something that's bite-sized? Do you want it to be 15 minutes, 20 minutes, 2 hours, a 2,000 word paper or 20,000 word paper? You know, it's just think about how you want to consume research input yourselves.
Oh, that's brilliant. Food for thought. So get thinking about this, everyone. And please do share your stories with Joe and Alistair at our celebration event. We're going to create this really exciting tapestry of knowledge. Yeah, so I'm really excited about it. So just before I stop recording, I'd like to say thank you so much to Joe, and thank you to Alistair for joining us, for sharing your wisdom and your ideas, and we can't wait to see you at the Research Roundtable. So bye for now.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.